This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And we turn our attention this morning immediately to a remarkable intervention from the most senior, the highest ranking Jewish official in the American government on the ongoing actions of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, it's remarkable for a number of reasons, but for our purposes, it is by far the most senior Israeli ally, using language that we started using on this program some weeks ago. Indeed, he uses the word pariah. He has backed Israel throughout his 25 years in the Senate and has warned now that the casualties, the current level of casualties, risk turning Israel into a pariah. And I come back to this and I do make it a little bit personal because Sandra's already been in touch to call me a Jew hater. We're talking about the highest ranking Jewish official in the US government, Sandra, so you'd have to include him in that categorization as well. Stand by for me being accused of shilling for Israel and doing the bidding of my Jewish paymasters. That usually follows fast upon. But it's an act of political courage from Chuck Schumer, the US Senate Majority Leader, because it does two things. It puts incredible tension upon that alliance, upon that relationship between America and Israel, and it moves into a new space, a space that other commentators and other politicians can't really push the issue into. That tragic scenario whereby Israel is, or Benjamin Netanyahu, is rendering Israel a pariah. He is losing the goodwill, even the support of people who, in Chuck Schumer's case, have spent 25 years in the American Senate defending almost every move that successive Israeli governments have taken. It is an extraordinary moment because although what he said is not remarkable in many ways, what he said is simply true, in my opinion. Perhaps not in yours, in which case 034560600973. What is significant is the status and, to a degree, the religion of the man that has said it. He has called for Israel to hold elections to replace Benjamin Netanyahu, something which I think, and there'll be better informed people than me on domestic Israeli politics listening to this at the moment, I think that probably would have happened if Hamas had not launched that terrorist attack on October the 7th of last year. And what he does, if you don't fully appreciate the gravity of Chuck Schumer's intervention, what he does effectively is put Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas in the same place when it comes to preventing peace being achieved, when it comes specifically to the achievement of a two-state solution. He is blaming both the individual, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the institution, or the terrorist institution, Hamas, prescribed in this country, not in all countries. He is putting them in the same space when it comes to peace. And I think that is extraordinary. 8 minutes after 10 is the time, but I also think it's inevitable, because do you remember the first question that we asked about limits? Not long after Israel started responding to that terror attack, when we started wondering how many deaths would be too many, I think Chuck Schumer, the highest-ranking Jewish official in the US government, has reached the point. He thinks that point has been passed. There was never going to be a bell, was there? There was never going to be a siren that went off when that figure was passed. Some people still dispute the overall death toll, the overall casualties, and point to the fact that the world has little choice but to rely upon figures released by the Gaza Health Ministry, which is, of course, controlled by Hamas. But most objective observers take into account the fact that they publish names, they publish lists. It is highly unlikely that the final death toll will be lower than where it is now. Even if there were no more deaths, it is almost certain that the final death toll would be higher when bodies are dug out of rubble and when reports are properly processed. If you can't even feed people, which is the case at the moment, starvation is a daily threat in the Gaza Strip, then the likelihood of having the bureaucratic institutions in place to properly register death and disappearance is vanishingly small. But there it is. It is the first time that a Washington leader, a leader in Washington, a senior government member in Washington has directly criticized Benjamin Netanyahu's approach to the conflict in Gaza. I'm going to play you some of his words, and I then will ask you the question of why it's taken so long. Because this has been obvious to many of us for ages. People who are in need of no instruction or lectures upon the importance of Israel's security and sovereignty, but who also refuse to feel less sad or less heartbroken about the death of a Palestinian child than they do about an Israeli child. This has been obvious for months, well, weeks. It's been obvious for weeks that Netanyahu was not acting in Israel's best interests. And yet now, at the middle of March of 2024, the US Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has finally said it out loud. Have a little listen to some of his speech. Quite a long clip, but it's important.
I have known Prime Minister Netanyahu for a very long time. While we have vehemently disagreed on many occasions, I will always respect his extraordinary bravery for Israel on the battlefield as a younger man. I believe in his heart he has his highest priority is the security of Israel. However, I also believe Prime Minister Netanyahu has lost his way by allowing his political survival to take the precedence over the best interests of Israel. He has put himself in coalition with far-right extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and as a result, he has been too willing to tolerate the civilian toll in Gaza, which is pushing support for Israel worldwide to historic lows. Israel cannot survive if it becomes a pariah. As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. The world has changed radically since then, and the Israeli people are being stifled right now by a governing vision that is stuck in the past. At this critical juncture, I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel, at a time when so many Israelis have lost their confidence in the vision and direction of their government. Hamas and the Palestinians who support and tolerate their evil ways, radical right-wing Israelis in government and society, President Abbas, Prime Minister Netanyahu. These are the four obstacles to peace, and if we fail to overcome them, then Israel and the West Bank and Gaza will be trapped in the same violent state of affairs they've experienced for the last 75 years.
This is extraordinary. I mean, obviously extraordinary. The idea that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is being cited by the Senate leader, the majority leader in the US Senate, the most senior Jewish person in the American government. The Israeli Prime Minister is being cited as an obstacle to peace in the same breath as Hamas itself. And the mention of those far-right ministers, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, something that not many corners of the British media have done, sadly. I mean, the reasons why will be one for the history books, but I know myself and at least one or two of my colleagues, such as Sheila Fogarty here on LBC, have been clear about this from the start. Getting into bed with people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, well, let's just say that they would struggle not to fall foul of Michael Gove's latest definition of extremism, were it to be introduced in Israel. And yet it's today, or rather yesterday, that this has happened. I don't know whether or not it's a moment for asking whether he's right, because I don't know how you'd argue with him being right from a factual or evidential position. I can just about see how you'd argue with him from an emotional position, and I'm not for a minute pretending that it's possible to remove emotions from conversations like this, but evidentially, it's just true. You can track the support for Israel that he describes. You can see in real time its decline. You can watch the death toll rise. And if you must, you can argue over the provenance of the statistics. But as I say, the objective overview is that the actual number of dead is likely to be far higher once it includes people who haven't been able to reach hospitals and people still lost under the rubble of buildings hit by Israeli airstrikes. It's slightly surreal today, for me at least, and quite possibly for you, because this is... so obviously, this was a point that was so obviously going to come, and yet it still feels like a moment of enormous significance. It's as if stating the obvious has become some sort of revolutionary act. So I think that's where we'll go. I think we'll just say he's right, isn't he? And as a historical or a traditional supporter of Israel, whether from, in my case, humanitarian and historical reasons, or whether in yours perhaps for familial and religious reasons, what Benjamin Netanyahu has done and is doing is catastrophic. Absolutely catastrophic. So we're having a phone-in that we've had before, but we're having it today in a completely different context from the one we had last time. The question of how you feel about the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is shredding Israel's international reputation, shredding it for what appear to be personal reasons of ambition and survival. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. If you know a little bit more about the issues than I do, perhaps you can have a crack at telling me why it's taken so long. That slightly simplistic phone-in question of how many deaths will be too many. Chuck Schumer has reached the point where that milestone has been passed. We'll never know when precisely. We don't know where. But those are the questions today. Chuck Schumer portrays Benjamin Netanyahu as a politician who has turned and is turning Israel into a pariah state. Question number one, is he right? I kind of struggle to see how you can argue with him at the moment. But and remember, just because you might still support Benjamin Netanyahu, that doesn't challenge Schumer's point that the world is increasingly disgusted at his actions. And then question number two becomes, what does this mean? Because when he talks, and I'll play you the clip again, I suspect, but when he talks about threatening Israel's existence depending on goodwill and support that Benjamin Netanyahu is hemorrhaging, that is a moment at which supporters and defenders of Israel's right to exist in its current form should be really, really alarmed. Chuck Schumer, the majority leader of the US Senate, the most senior Jewish person in the American administration, the most senior Jewish person in Washington, suggesting that this hemorrhaging of support and goodwill for Israel poses a form, or could pose a form, of existential threat to the country's very existence. I would cautiously suggest that if you care deeply about the future survival of Israel, it's time to come off social media and stop accusing people reporting the facts of blood libel or anti-Semitism and focus instead upon what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing in your name. Isn't it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 18 minutes after 10. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
A couple of texts. This is from John, who is in Newton Le Willows, and describes himself as a 61-year-old British Jew. He writes, I wholly concur with Chuck Schumer. Since 2017, I have reluctantly declared Israel to be a pariah state, as Bibi, as Benjamin Netanyahu's nickname, aligned ever further with the far right within Likud and coalition parties. He is concluding his stated ambition in 1973 to eradicate all Palestinian Arabs from Gaza and the West Bank. I believe that Bibi's actions have made the whole world less safe for fellow Jews and a lethal place for Gazans. And this is from a friend of mine who is at work. So I don't know if I can say her name or not, but it is someone who I happen to know has is Jewish and has a lot of family in Israel, and has been in touch with me quite a lot since October the 7th. I think it's coming now, as it's only now becoming apparent to Israelis after the shock of October the 7th begins to subside. Biden did everything he could to signal to Israelis that he is on their side, in many ways providing more comfort and confidence in the immediate aftermath of October the 7th than Netanyahu ever afforded, as he was focusing on protecting himself and avoiding responsibility for what happened, any responsibility for what happened. He and the Democrats laid the ground to speak directly to Israelis when the time has come, and now the time has come. That's a better introduction than I managed, actually. Has the time come for friends of Israel, whether the most senior Jewish statesman in America or just some gob on a stick on British radio? Has the time come to say you have to change course now? And changing course, of course, involves getting rid of Benjamin Netanyahu. I'll play you Schumer's speech, or one part of Schumer's speech once again, and then we will get the phone lines open. Or rather, then we'll start taking your calls. The phone lines are open. To be clear, the question is about what Chuck Schumer has said and what is happening. It's not about anything else today, however high your feelings may be running. The phone-in is about what Chuck Schumer has said, the possibility of challenging the facts as he relays them, and the consequences of his descriptions if they are, as I believe them to be, true.
I have known Prime Minister Netanyahu for a very long time. While we have vehemently disagreed on many occasions, I will always respect his extraordinary bravery for Israel on the battlefield as a younger man. I believe in his heart he has his highest priority is the security of Israel. However, I also believe Prime Minister Netanyahu has lost his way by allowing his political survival to take the precedence over the best interests of Israel. He has put himself in coalition with far-right extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and as a result, he has been too willing to tolerate the civilian toll in Gaza, which is pushing support for Israel worldwide to historic lows. Israel cannot survive if it becomes a pariah. As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. The world has changed radically since then, and the Israeli people are being stifled right now by a governing vision that is stuck in the past. At this critical juncture, I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel, at a time when so many Israelis have lost their confidence in the vision and direction of their government. Hamas and the Palestinians who support and tolerate their evil ways, radical right-wing Israelis in government and society, President Abbas, Prime Minister Netanyahu. These are the four obstacles to peace, and if we fail to overcome them, then Israel and the West Bank and Gaza will be trapped in the same violent state of affairs they've experienced for the last 75 years.
I don't know if this is true from Jude, but it might be. Chuck Schumer has lumped Netanyahu in the same grouping as Hamas. You just heard those words there. Only a politician of Jewish heritage could speak out in this way, and well done to him. It is just a fact. They are both barriers to peace. And when you say only a politician of Jewish heritage could speak out like this, I don't agree, but I don't think anybody else would speak with comparable impact. That's the point. And also, I think he's insulated from accusations of anti-Semitism or blood libel, which would have been levelled at anybody else previous to today, saying exactly what Chuck Schumer said on the floor of the Senate yesterday. It's a proper moment. I apologise if I'm not conveying that. I think I am, but just in case I'm not, then I will trust my callers to do so. Let's start in Israel. Let's start in Tel Aviv with Melvin. Melvin, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I've been listening to your introduction, and as an Israeli, I totally agree that Mr. Netanyahu ought to be replaced. We have an election system, we have a proper democracy. In fact, it's probably too democratic sometimes.
That's a conversation for another day, I think.
Right. Assuming that the election delivers somebody new, I would welcome that. I abhor having people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir in the government. However, I think there's a huge confusion. And the first thing is I resent Mr. Schumer creating an immoral equivalence between Hamas and Netanyahu. There is just no comparison. Absolutely none. I also think
I can't speak for Chuck Schumer, but on the simple question of opposition to a two-state solution, there's quite a lot of common ground.
Well, there may be, but that does.
So that's not a moral. That's not a moral equivalence. That's a policy equivalence.
Okay, there might be a policy equivalence, perhaps. I'm not sure that in the foreseeable future, meaning your lifetimes and mine, that a Palestinian state is viable. I'm not sure that the Palestinians actually want it. If you listen to whether it's the people on the streets of New York and London or the Palestinians in this part of the world, they really want a state instead of Israel, not next door to Israel. And it's going to take a generation or two of re-education before that changes.
Well, I can't let you speak for supporters of the Palestinian state, Melvin, can I?
No, you can't. I'm not a supporter of a Palestinian state.
No, I know
lifetime.
you're not, but you can't tell me or my listeners what the people who do want a Palestinian state really believe or really want. Only they can tell us that.
No, but I can tell you what I'm hearing from them.
Of course you can, but we all hear sometimes what we want to hear. There are plenty of people supportive of a two-state solution. You know there are.
Yes, in Europe and America, not around this part of the world.
Well, you just talked about the streets of London and New York a minute ago, so make your mind up with respect.
No, but I'm talking about from an Israeli point of view and a Middle Eastern point of view. Nobody really believes it's going to happen in our lifetimes.
That's a fair comment, but you can only speak for yourself. So if someone rings in and says the opposite, I will remind them that they can only speak for themselves. It's not always helpful to claim to have a sort of unique insight into the thinking of millions of people who aren't going to ring me today. But what about Schumer's...
my opinion.
I know you are. Your opinion of what other people think. What about Schumer's warning for Israel's survival? What about this relationship between pariah status and survival? Does that you think he's got that wrong as well? Does that not give you pause?
Well, I think it's a very extreme thing
Come
to
on,
say.
man. This is Chuck Schumer. 25 years of almost unquestioning support for Israel. It's got to be a moment of reflection, hasn't it?
I told you at the very beginning of this conversation, I'm really unhappy with the extreme government we have. I don't for a moment support it. I go out demonstrating every Saturday night against it. That does not mean Israel is a pariah state.
No, but the fear he has is that it is becoming one as a consequence of the actions that you're protesting against. That doesn't seem to me to be an enormous logical leap.
Well, I think that
Why are you protesting against it?
No, let me...
Of course I will, sorry.
Let me explain.
Yes, of course.
So people are confusing Netanyahu's government with support for the war that's going on. And I would say to you that people like me who want to see a new government, want to see a moderate government, however, we support the intention to destroy Hamas's military capability. We all hate, and I really mean this, we hate the death toll on both sides. We really do. But nobody's found a way to fight a war without innocent civilians dying. And, but nobody in Israel wants to see this war end until the...
You've done it again, haven't you? Because there are loads of people in Israel who've called for a ceasefire.
Well, I live here.
Well, I know you do, but it doesn't mean you have. It doesn't mean you have like a magic phone line into everybody's mind. You know that there's plenty of people in Israel calling for a ceasefire. Well, you can't say nobody in Israel. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu says that we're never going to finish until it's completely over. The plausibility of that is probably zero. But I can't just, I don't want to go around in circles, Melvin. But you can't speak for everybody who wants a two-state solution any more than you can speak for every Israeli. And you don't want the war to end. So I'll ask you finally. No, well, of course you do. And you hear it on the street when you're surrounded by the people that are protesting with you. But the question I've asked everybody since this nightmare began is whenever people tell me that they abhor all deaths and they're very unhappy with all that, how many is too many?
I wouldn't put it that way. I would say
Well,
to
I am.
you,
That's what I'm asking you.
Okay, all right. I can't put a limit. How many was too many in Dresden?
Because Chuck
How
Schumer
many
can.
was too many in Hiroshima? Chuck Schumer can say what he likes. He's
Yes,
an American.
and so can you. And so how many is too many?
I want the minimum deaths necessary
that ship has
to
sailed.
achieve what we have to achieve.
That ship has sailed. So how many is too many?
That ship has not sailed.
Of
We
course
are
it
still
has.
fighting. And at the moment, we're assuming that 80% of Hamas has been destroyed. We cannot allow the other 20% to set fire. It's like putting 80% of a fire out. The 20%
I'd like to
will
talk to you
catch
more
again.
about that. I can't because of the timing. And I'd like to have a calm conversation about what seems to so many to be I think, to be generous, the epic naivety of believing that by killing everybody in Gaza, or killing thousands and thousands of people in Gaza, and hopefully catching all members of Hamas in that increasingly indiscriminate net, you'll somehow kill off the ideology. It's so obvious to so many people watching that if you kill someone's dad because he's in Hamas, they sign up for the same ideology, the same cause in that moment. But we'll have to have that conversation another day. It's 10:33. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:38 is the time. Couple of phone lines free if you want to get involved in this conversation. Some responses to Melvin, who called us from Tel Aviv. Kevin in Norwich says, the guy from Tel Aviv is unwittingly showing why Israel is becoming a pariah state. This is the warning that Chuck Schumer, the majority leader in the US Senate and the most senior Jewish politician in America, has made overnight. Kevin says, I don't owe people like Melvin complicity or support. He needs to understand that pariah is a status that is conferred upon you as a consequence of actions. It's nothing to do with whether or not you want to be a pariah. You can't meaningfully refuse pariah status. And Matthew makes a further point. The notion that Israel can only tackle a terrorist organisation by blindly flattening an entire urban area and laying waste to its civilian population remains an utterly absurd contention. I agree with you, Matthew, but I also know that is the position that not only the Israeli government but almost all of its supporters have adopted since this started. And it seems unlikely that the twain will ever meet. And Sarah writes, an amazing conversation you just had, James. It makes me see fully the insanity of the idea that Hamas can be exterminated. Kill one man and his children will sign up for sure. I've known this but never comprehended it quite so completely before. I'm happy to hear the challenges to that argument, the opposite analysis, that by killing people who are currently members of Hamas, you succeed in killing off the ideologies and ideas that drew them to Hamas in the first place. I mean, I almost would welcome that contribution. John is in St Albans. John, what would you like to say?
James, hi. John here, first-time caller.
Welcome.
I just wanted to just kind of mention what you just mentioned, really, in so much as the previous caller left me dismayed and thought his logic was, fundamentally flawed and naive. Just with regards to Chuck Schumer and his comments, which I fully endorse and I fully agree, but I think it's very sad that all the world leaders, or the vast majority of world leaders, have sat back and said nothing to the extent that Chuck Schumer has said. And, why does it come to this? Why does it take Chuck Schumer to come out and say who's Jewish, as we all know, and all the rest of the world politicians sit back and do absolutely nothing or can't make any statements to that effect? I just think it's a disgrace.
Yeah, I mean, it carries more weight when a friend offers criticism than it does when an enemy does, I suppose. You could argue that answers part of your question, but not all of it.
I think it certainly carries more weight, but what I'm asking is why the world politicians sat there and not prepared to speak up on behalf of the Palestinians and the atrocities that have been carried out.
I mean, we get a very Anglo-centric worldview, or Anglophonic worldview. I mean, you saw how the votes went at the United Nations months ago. The worldview. This is not even Western. It's the Anglosphere. It's basically America and the UK now. I think it has been for some time.
And most of Europe, I would say,
a bit more split than we are. What's your answer to that question?
With respect to why?
Yeah.
Well, I just think that it's all politics. I think the Israeli government's very influential. Well, sorry, but yes. I think they're very influential, and I think a lot of people and a lot of governments
I'm more
very
sympathetic
because they're accused of anti-Semitism.
I think that's part of it. I mean, and you clearly are. I'm not only accused of anti-Semitism, but you also have the unpleasantness of experiencing the opposite. I'll give you a quick example of that from a texter. Stop pretending you don't know why the genocide of Palestinians is ongoing. I told you it's because Jews have penetrated every Western government, especially the UK and USA, and they have powerful lobbies while the Gentiles, i.e. the sheeples, keep obeying. You need to read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is the most virulently anti-Semitic hoax, arguably, in the history of anti-Semitism. But you've got someone listening to this radio programme who not only swallows it wholesale, but believes that sort of anti-Semitic bilge is a helpful contribution to this conversation. So you have both of those positions in place. The people who will accuse you of anti-Semitism if you simply say, I wish Israel would stop killing children, and the people who are convinced that the Jews rule the world. So you have to walk that tightrope. That applies to Western governments as well. But I do think, and we haven't touched on this for a while, John, I do think that the generational trauma of Jewish people is relevant here. I do think that the necessity of a safe haven, post-Holocaust in particular, post-Shoah, for Jewish people puts Israel in a different place to any other country in a comparable situation. What Israel does to protect itself is judged differently from what every other or any other country would do. And I think that's fair, personally. I think that the context is crucial, but it doesn't answer all of your question, of course, but it does, I think, answer some of it. Western governments are incredibly reluctant to say to Israel, you can only protect yourselves up to a certain point. And, of course, what politicians like Netanyahu do is deliberately conflate self-defense or protection with attacks on enemies. And that's why it takes someone of Schumer's background and status to call foul on that conflation, I think.
Yeah, and I think I agree with your point. I agree with your point too. But where do you draw the line with all of that?
Yeah, no, well, you don't. That's the point.
Defense.
That's the point that Netanyahu and to a degree Melvin are dancing on. That's the pinhead that they're dancing on. There is no point. Everything is justified, whether you're talking about self-defense or whether you're talking about the eradication of Hamas, which of course is where the conflation is at its clearest, I think. Thank you, John. It's coming up to 11:15. I'll stay with this for as long as it's interesting to you and to me. We don't really pay that much attention to our segments. We certainly haven't been doing this week, largely because the Diane Abbott story has concerned us so much. First time we haven't opened the programme with it, but I would like to share some thoughts of my friend and colleague Sangeeta Maiska with you. Sangeeta, of course, will be with you this weekend. She says, isn't it interesting how quickly parts of the Westminster bubble has lost perspective? So she writes, just to be clear, it's Diane Abbott MP who has had a bad week, in quotes. She is the victim of racism, not the Tory party, who excused it. Yes, a timely reminder, perhaps, of the brain-boiling dangers of having your face a little bit too close to the screen when you're watching our political pageant unfold.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I may have to eat some humble pie this morning because the amount of British beef exported to Australia under the UK's post-Brexit free trade agreement has now been published. And I will reveal to you just how much British... You'll remember it was going to be brilliant for farmers. Brexit in general was going to be brilliant for farmers, and the Australian trade deal was going to be brilliant for Britain, because how do we know that? Because Boris Johnson and Liz Truss said so. And who can doubt their records when it comes to competence and truth-telling? So we are now in receipt of the figure. In fact, we've got both figures. Should we do it in tons or cows? What do you prefer? You can choose. How many cows or how many tons of British beef have been exported to Australia since that fantastic trade deal was signed by Boris Johnson after being negotiated by Liz Truss? And how much Australian beef has made its way into the UK simultaneously? I shall give you the numbers shortly. And I need to thank someone who I forgot to thank. Someone has made me a hook and tease toy. Hi, YouTubers. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ding, ding, ring that bell. Someone has made me a hook and tease toy. Why are you laughing at me? Is that not how you ring a bell? How do you ring a bell? What? No, it's a bell on a rope. Like ding, ding, like a school bell. No? Anyway, hi, YouTubers. So someone has made a hook. And I've lost your letter, so apologies, but thank you. Someone has made a hook and a tease. So what I do is I stick this somewhere. Yeah, all right, matron. I stick this somewhere appropriate, and then I say to you, how much beef has the UK exported to Australia since Boris Johnson signed that trade deal? And I take the tease off the hook, right? This is like Toto, isn't it? Pulling back the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. I take the tease off the hook and put it in front of me. I have this. Unfortunately, the magnet's not very strong, so I can't actually get it to stick to anything at the moment, but I'm going to invest in some blue tack next week. And then I look down at my notes and I see the tease here, and I remember, I haven't told them that thing I teased. And then I tell you, which I'll do shortly, and then I put it back on the hook. Ready for the next one. How mad is that? I am what you might call a very analog individual, so this works perfectly for me. Thank you, whoever sent it to me, and apologies for forgetting. Back to the altogether more serious question of Chuck Schumer's comments on the Senate floor, which are extraordinary in the context of describing Israel potentially as a pariah state and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as an obstacle to peace in the region of an order comparable to Hamas itself. But he's right. Alex is in Aldershot. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Just a couple of things. One of them about the comments when he said the Palestinians tolerating Hamas.
Yes.
I mean, who would like to be mass starved and bombed because, let's say, the UK tolerated the Brexit leadership? I don't think I would want to be bombed and starved to death because some people didn't agree with that.
Did he say tolerated or supported?
He said tolerated.
Schumer did?
And maybe he said otherwise, but he most certainly used the word tolerate. But in general, like...
You have little choice but to tolerate Hamas if you're in Gaza. I take your point.
Well, but also, when are we going to stop generalizing about any people when we know that generalizing is the first step towards dehumanization? And who can we generalize about? And so that's dangerous in itself. And to say that all Israelis... Well,
to be fair, I mean, I hope I'm not splitting hairs. He's not generalizing when he talks about tolerating Hamas, is he? Some people support Hamas, some people tolerate Hamas, some people do neither. But I think... But
the rhetoric, and he's supporting Israel, the rhetoric is that they all deserve to be punished because they voted Hamas in.
Well, we heard very different things on this, I think. We heard very different things. I didn't hear Chuck Schumer saying in any terms that everybody in Gaza deserves to be punished.
Well, I feel like he's taking steps towards making the correct political steps, not necessarily practicing introversion. But most certainly not Israelis support this war. I have a friend who moved from Israel partly because of this. They were going to move anyway because there has been a lot of things happening before October 7th, and they're very happy outside. And a lot of people don't necessarily feel reassured safe that they will be safe after all these events, because how is this?
Well, this is the
logic. We can't.
This is the terrifying consequence of becoming a pariah state, and Schumer goes there. He talks of essentially.
Is it enough on a human level? It's enough on a political level. But on a humane level, he still hasn't mentioned the mass starvation, the skin and bones of children, the vulnerable dying first, and what entitles us as a Western 21st century people. Like, we're practicing the emperor's new clothes, and the emperor has
I'm going to. I mean, just not just in the interest of balance, because I was quite robust talking to Melvin. I'm going to disagree with you on this. 5 months into this conflict, it is clear that Israelis need to take stock of the situation and ask, must we change course? You can put whatever you want under the heading situation. You can put all of the things that you've just described under situation. You can put the death toll under situation. You can put the warnings of starvation under situation. It's all there. He doesn't need to say it out loud and in detail. In fact, it would probably harm his cause if he did so, because he'd be accused of emotion and he'd be moving into realms.
He would be. Of course, he would be.
So he said, "Is it time to take stock of the situation and ask, must we change course?" And he's answering that question with a pretty positive yes. What more could he do?
Well, ask for a ceasefire Any one of us, if we were in Gaza.
What do you think change course means? What do you think change course means?
People are still dying. The aid hasn't gotten in yet. It's so slow. It's
not an answer to my question. What do you think change course means?
Just because we vote in different leaders doesn't mean he wants a different leader. He wants Netanyahu out. When Rishi took over, what has changed for us? Not much.
Well, many Israelis have lost their confidence in the vision and direction of their government. It's not just a change of personnel, it's a change of course.
Yeah. Well, it is a good step, but it just still doesn't feel like we have done enough to get to where we need to be, which is...
Well, you can say that, and I understand where you're coming from, but I think today, to be calling for Chuck Schumer to have done more when his intervention is both unprecedented and guaranteed to elicit huge levels of criticism from within American politics is perhaps a tad unfair. But hey, I could be wrong. Thank you, Alex. 10:57 is the time. Chris is very unhappy with you, Alex. He says, your caller just equated Hamas with Brexit voters, and you did not bring her up on it. Incredible, says Chris in Brighton. I mean, look, with respect to Alex, I thought it was too silly to properly engage with, to be fair with you, Chris. But if you're very, very upset, then I apologise on Alex's behalf for her hurty words. Anton is in Copenhagen. Anton, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank you. I'm a first-time caller. Been listening to you and your coverage of this ghastly situation for months. Thank you so much for just being, I want to say, the voice of reason. I think that was the slogan of a newspaper, wasn't it?
You.
I don't approve of it. Yeah. But bless you. Anyway, what I want to say is that I think Chuck Schumer did exactly the right thing, and I'm amazed and surprised that he said what he said, and it's brilliant. But I think, unfortunately, my thoughts on it is that it goes further than that. I think after this, it's not just Israel that's going to be a pariah. I think it's Jews in general, because unfortunately, I'm speaking as a Jewish person. I'm not a practicing Jew. I'm just a Jew by birth.
Sure.
I live in Copenhagen. I was just talking to your producer earlier. She asked me what the attitude in Copenhagen is. I can't speak for the Copenhagen government. I'm only here because I married a Danish woman.
Sure.
And I can't really speak for the Danish people. My Danish isn't good enough to speak to most of them. But I can say that Denmark has always been very kind to Jews. They took a whole lot of refugees in the Second World War. They're very proud of that. I understand the Danish king during the Second World War insisted on wearing a yellow star.
Gosh.
Because he said if some of my, that was under German occupation. Anyway, that's not my point. I also live in an area in a housing block with a lot of Muslim and Islamic people around me, my neighbors. They're fantastic people. There are a lot. Looking out my window now, I can see Palestinian flags hanging out of some of the windows, and I absolutely support them in that. My problem is, I would feel frightened to say to them, I'm a Jew.
The conflation of your faith, the faith of your birth, really, over which you have no control any more than I do over mine, being conflated with support for the Israeli government, or in particular, or Israel in general, wherever we are in history.
Indeed. And, in the past, I've suffered anti-Semitism. I've actually been accused of killing Jesus by somebody. Yeah. And, you had
just to be clear, you weren't involved in that at all, Anton.
Well, I've got a very good alibi.
I just want to check up on that. I don't want to let anything pass unexamined.
No. But that's the kind of nonsense that you get. And it is nonsense. But, you had a previous message, I think it was, a text citing the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Yeah.
And it's just dredging up.
It's anti-Semitism 101. I mean, it is almost the mothership of anti-Semitic hoaxes. But you have to pay the consequences of that in a way that I can never contemplate or share.
Yeah, my grandparents were refugees from Tsarist Russia. This is before World War II. Anti-Semitism goes way back, and it never goes away. And all Netanyahu is doing is poking a stick in that anti-Semitic hornet's nest, and it scares me to death.
I'm sorry for that, and there's nothing I can say, because that wouldn't sound platitudinal or would sound genuinely reassuring. You know that most people listening to this programme feel nothing but sympathy for your situation, but it's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, how do you wobble the head of somebody who thinks that all Jews are somehow either supportive of or complicit in the current actions of Israel? I don't know how you reach that level of pig-headedness.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. It's not only that. I've had people telling me, amazed at the fact that I haven't got much money because I'm Jewish. All Jews have got money, haven't they? It's always there. And I don't even. I mean, in principle, I agree with the idea of the state of Israel, but in practice, at the expense of another people, the Palestinians, no way. And also, I've often thought, it's very nice to have a homeland that I could potentially go to because I'm Jewish. But isn't that just like telling all black people they can go back to Africa?
I don't think it is personally. I don't know that I mean, for me, the Shoah is absolutely intrinsic to my attitude to Israel in 2024. What happened to Jewish people in 1930s and 40s Europe. And I don't know whether this would be sustainable 100 years from now. But to me today, I can't separate the two. And the Holocaust of slavery doesn't get addressed by the creation of a homeland. I don't see the two as being remotely similar. Anton.
No, okay. I mean that's fair, personally, enough, James. But no, you're absolutely right. Practically, no, you're absolutely right.
But that distinction between the principle of the state's existence and the point at which you cannot support what it is doing in the name of self-defense is the nub of this entire moment, isn't it?
I cannot support that, and while I cannot support that, I then, by inference, cannot support the state of Israel.
In its actions now, not in its right to exist, but in its actions now.
Well, I mean, well, as I said, in principle it has a right to exist, but surely it doesn't have the right to exist at the expense of other people.
I suppose I don't want to get semantic on you, but almost all states exist. The rights anywhere where there's a separatist movement or an independence movement. But the phrase that resonates with me, and I only came across it during this iteration of conflict in the Middle East, was that Israel would be the modern state of Israel would become a home for a land without a people would be given to a people without a land, and of course that, as Anton's just highlighted, how horribly and completely overlooks the fact that there were people, 70 or 80,000 people, I think, but of course many more now descended from that removal, and it was, and there's no way past that, and that's what he is referring to. But it doesn't dilute mine, and Anton's Jewish, I'm not, but it doesn't dilute my historical justification, rationale, support, belief in the need for a unique state on this planet for Jewish people because of the history of anti-Semitism and the history of persecution. 4 minutes after 11 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Okay, we're going in. You thought the last hour was potentially? That's a lovely word, isn't it? Potentially. I've turned into Ned Flanders. It was potentially. You thought it was potentially. I've done it again. That wasn't even. That was deliberate. That wasn't even deliberate. I'm going to have a brain wobble now on the word potentially. That wasn't. If you thought the last hour was potentially febrile, wait until you find out what we're going to be talking about next. I have held off doing this, thanks largely to Frank Hester, the racist abuser of, or the provider of racist abuse of Diane Abbott, who it turned out yesterday has given another 5 million quid to the Tories, which can't be confirmed until the next load of accounts are published, but does rather explain why none of them were prepared to say that they wouldn't take more money off him. How many people here, when journalists actually asked Tories whether they'd take more money off them, and was it Kevin Hollinrake who said yes? Who was the one who said yes first? Doesn't really matter. They're all much of a muchness. But how many of you actually thought, how many of us actually thought, I bet they've already taken more? Didn't cross my mind. Did not cross my mind. And we've talked of little else this week. As Sangeeta reminds us, some members of my profession are describing the Tories as having had a bad week, to which Diane Abbott has something to say. And when she does find the space and peace in which to say it, I hope that she'll say it to you. The invitation to Diane to come on this programme remains very, very much in play whenever and however it suits her. But I think I said 70,000 for the Nakba in 1948 instead of 700,000, which of course is a stupid slip of the tongue, but in the context of these conversations, it's an incredibly important one. Stephen has written beef in capital letters with several exclamation marks, so you know what that means, don't you? This didn't work. And I took the T's off the hook, and then I just moved it to one side and put it next to my fruit salad. So the answer to the question, do you know this? The answer to the question of how much beef has been exported to Australia under the whiz-bang trade deal signed by Boris Johnson and Liz Truss? Are you ready for this? None. Zero, nada, zilch. Not even enough for a cheeseburger. Earlier this month, it gets worse, an exporter of beef jerky. I mean, that is bold. That's almost like... jerky's more of a South African thing, isn't it? Biltong and stuff. Is it? Or is it a Southern Hemisphere thing? Jerky? It is. Trying to export beef jerky to Australia is a bit like trying to sell ice to the Inuits, isn't it? Well, fair play to them. I like that. That's a great move. But... it had its shipment blocked. Imagine that. Imagine getting a deal, actually signing the... Whoa, we're selling beef jerky to the Aussies. And then it gets blocked by Australian border controls because the UK government had not requested access. Fairly conclusive proof that Boris Johnson had no idea what he was signing. It's the first time, it is believed to be the first time that a British business had tried to export beef to Australia under the free trade agreement which came into effect last May. Signed in December 2021, the first free trade agreement agreed by the government after Brexit. Part of Liz Truss's campaign to get into Downing Street by pretending that the things she was signing were either beneficial or meaningful or both. Known now in the trade as doing a Badenoch, doing a Kemi Badenoch. She signed another amazing, meaningless hill of beans with Texas this week. Do you know how much the deal that Kemi Badenoch signed with Texas this week is worth? I'll give you a clue. It's worth exactly the same figure as the amount of beef that's been exported to Australia under the free trade agreement signed by Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And how much beef do you think Australian farmers have exported to the UK in the same period? Go on, have a guess. Shall I do another hook and tease? No, I'll fit 1,700 tonnes. 1,700 tonnes of Australian beef has come in this direction and precisely 0 tonnes of British beef has gone in the other. Well, actually, precisely 0 grams, ounces of British beef has gone in the other. It's just mad, right? And those of us, of course, who told you what was going to happen, still waiting for our letters of apology from Billy Buncher-Numbers with his Bulldog avatar and all his mates on Twitter. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. So what are we going to talk about this hour? Right, stand by your hats. No, stand by, what is it? You hold on to your hats. What do you stand by? Beds. Beds? Are you sure? Stand by your bed. Anyway, stand by. That photo of Kate Windsor and her kids, and the fact that do you know what one leading boss of a photo agency has said this week, said in the last 24 hours? The only time we normally have to do stuff like this is with countries like North Korea. So Kensington Palace, home of our future king and queen, God willing, has been compared by the head of, I think, the AFP to North Korea. Such is the rareness of the sort of manipulations on a publicly released photograph that we saw earlier this week. So I'm interested in it. I'm not interested in it because I think the royal family are interesting or important. The royal family are interesting and important to millions of people. I can kind of take it or leave it. But I'm fascinated by the relationship between the media and the people. I'm fascinated by the relationship between falsehoods and truths. I'm fascinated by so many elements of this story. And as we discussed in some detail with Mariana Spring earlier this week, I'm fascinated by conspiracy theories. I'm fascinated by trolling. I'm fascinated by this weird ecosystem that has grown up in direct opposition to observable reality. And this story plays into some of these themes, but not, of course, all of them. Because I kind of want to know what's happened with regard to this story. The thing that I take away from it is the, I think, irrefutable fact that the people in control of the information have decided that it is preferable for the speculation to continue apace than to simply tell the people what is going on. Even the Daily Mail managed to get this wrong earlier this week, and they normally are brilliant at second-guessing what the easily provoked people who don't like thinking much are going to feel about any given subject. So one of their columnists wrote about how essential it was for Kate and William to come forward and tell the people what is going on, wrote Sarah Vine, their columnist, only for the next day the entire paper pretty much to be dedicated to the backlash from their readers who are largely saying, leave them alone, leave them alone. Could you imagine what would happen if Meghan Markle had been busted for manipulating a photograph of her own children while desperately trying to secure public sympathy for an undisclosed situation? Could you just pause for a minute? Just pause for a minute. And imagine that Meghan Markle, do you know that they even lied about my friend Misan Harriman, who is almost the sort of official photographer to Meghan and Harry, and who took the photographs when they announced their pregnancy. And he got accused by some nutters in the right-wing media of having manipulated photographs when all he'd done was stick a black and white filter on a colour photo. Luckily, Misan is perfectly capable of sticking up for himself. He doesn't need me to. He nearly won an Oscar last week as well. The man's an absolute machine. He's a genius. But could you imagine if Meghan Markle had put out a family photograph and 10 minutes later the biggest picture agencies in the world had turned around and gone, oh no, sorry, kill this, we can't have this out, it's an absolute fraud, it's a complete fake, it's a manipulated image, and then put out a sort of mealy-mouthed apology on social media saying, oh, I'm terribly sorry, like a lot of photographers, I like to experiment with Photoshop. I mean, it is that's why I want to talk about it, because it's just incredibly mad. It's the maddest story that's happened since the last mad story. And I don't really know what's happened. And stop sending me Stand By Your Man on texts, please. Andy, Troy, Steve, everybody, Stand By Your Man. It's a good lie. You're right. That is a well-known response, or Stand By Your Man. But that's obviously not what I was saying. I say Stand By Your Beds or Hold On To Your Hats. It's not Stand By Your Man. What's happening? Explain it. And pretend I fell asleep last Friday. When did the picture come out? Do we know? When was it, roughly? Sunday. Yeah, so pretend I fell asleep last Saturday. Right? Last Saturday night, I fell asleep. Okay? And I've just woken up now. And I don't know what the hell is going on. Take a moment out of your morning to give me a ring and tell me. 03, how much conspiracy theory can we do on air without getting into trouble? Is it? Well, we just play the GBB's card, can't we? We can say anything we want. Well, don't upset anyone unduly, because they all tune into this show. All the princes, all the earls, all the dukes. They never turn it off. Even the late Queen used to have it on in the background while she was watching the racing. But I don't know what's happened. I tried to follow it. I followed it up to a point. But oddly, the point at which it took off for me was this morning when I saw one of the leading the boss of one of the biggest photo agencies in the world, comparing Kensington Palace to North Korea. And that's the moment that made me think, hang on, this is quite a big deal. They're comparing Kensington Palace to North Korea. Why on earth would you put out a manipulated photograph? So I fell asleep at 9 o'clock last Saturday night, and I've just woken up and I've read that Kensington Palace is basically North Korea when it comes to the question of how trustworthy they are. Could you tell me what has happened? 0345 6060 973. And crucially, if you want to be a little bit more meta about it, a little bit more intelligent, how important is this? I've got a feeling this is really, really important. What is it about this story which makes it so fertile for conspiracy theories? So in fact, I can't guarantee this, but I'm going to do my best not to tease you or mock you for caring too much about any element of the royal pageant, okay? But something about this story has been pretty close to perfect circumstances for conspiracy theories to spring up, including among people who usually know better. It's as if the conspiracy theories have a patina of plausibility for reasons that I don't fully understand. So I need you to tell me what's happened, as if I have been asleep since last Saturday. And I need you to tell me how important this is, because I don't know why and I can't articulate it properly, but I have got a feeling that this is very important. And then the final question is, why has this photograph, why has this story about this picture thrown up they're talking about it all over the world. one American television presenter has gone further than I think I can go on the radio in contemplating and speculating about what is going on. So what is it about this story that has created the perfect storm of circumstances for conspiracy theories? If you've never rung me before, but this is your ballywick, is that the right word? This is your patch, this is your manor, give me a ring today. Just fill me in. What the hell has happened? How important is it? And why does this story tick all the boxes of conspiracy theories? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. All right? 0345 6060 973. Hit those numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Do you know, this happens quite often. Not that often. If it happened too often, I'd probably have to have a bit of a think about whether or not I'm in the right job. But Chris in Exeter, he's not on yet, but I can see the note that is going to be on his call. It suggests that you can't label everyone who has questioned this as a conspiracy theorist. That's why it's interesting. My apologies for not getting to the nub of this a little sooner. That's kind of what I was alluding to when I said that somebody somewhere is in charge of information with regard to this story, and they've decided that all of the speculation is preferable to simply putting the facts out there. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that, but if all of the speculation and or conspiracy theories creates an environment that they consider preferable to publicising the actual facts, whatever they may be, then I'm afraid that calling it all conspiracy theory isn't fair. I would go so far as to say, all right, I think there's something going on, something a bit extraordinary going on here now. 0345 6060 973. And the reason why I think that is because the uncertainty has gone on for so long, and I am reading in the Daily Telegraph that Kensington Palace has been compared to North Korea by a news agency executive who said the Prince of Wales's household was no longer viewed as a trusted source. This is Agence France Presse. AFP said the photograph of the princess and her 3 children had clearly violated the agency's rules. This is not normal, actually, and those of us who find royal stories a bit silly push back on it for the wrong reason. Well, anyway, that's enough from me. Let's crack on. What's going on? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Jane is in Guildford. Jane, what can you tell us?
Yeah, well, I have this theory, you see, that Kim Jong-un is best pals with our dear royal family, and something dreadful. Sadly, maybe Kate died in hospital, and what they've done, they put out their feelers to him. And funnily enough, Kim Jong-un is in love with Kate, has a Kate lookalike in North Korea. And what they're doing now, they're organising with the royal family for her to replace our dear departed Kate. How about that one?
You're yanking my chain, I think. But this is, compared to some of the stuff that I've seen on social media, it's hard to be 100% sure that you are, but I think you are. But it doesn't answer the question of what is. I mean, you tune into this radio program expecting cool, calm, evidence-based reason.
I know.
And I'm saying to you, I think there is something a bit odd going on here. What do you say in response to that?
Yeah, I do kind of think there is something odd. In January, it's now sort of March, and this, and I was reading in some of the tabloids about, maybe she had a nervous breakdown, which would be horrible for all sorts of reasons. But it's ridiculous now. I can't.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it?
It's having a frenzy.
Well, I don't want to become part of the frenzy. And also, if there is a horrible medical scenario in place, then that argument that someone somewhere has decided that the speculation is preferable to the facts becomes quite poignant. It becomes quite troubling, quite upsetting to think that they think all of these conversations, albeit that Jane's original contribution was funny and designed to be funny. There is something, I think, significant. If you consider the royal family to be important, then this story is important. And if you don't consider the royal family to be important, then you're a bit of a wombat, with respect, because it just is. Whether you want it to be or not, it just is. The world stopped when King Charles got crowned. Man gets new hat. would be one way of writing that headline. Entire world stops to watch would be the second paragraph. So they can both be true at the same time. If the royal family is important, then this story, the longer it goes on, becomes more important. So I think there is something. But the problem is none of us know what. And do you know who knows even less than you do? People who get paid for being royal experts and invited onto TV and radio programmes. Well, they don't know even less than you do, but they know exactly the same as what you know. You can tell this is serious because we only do royal phone-ins at times of either monarchical demise or coronation. I don't think we do radio. I can't remember doing royal phone-ins in almost any other context. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. Chris is in Exeter. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First-time caller.
Welcome. Well, it's just an odd one to break your duck with, but fill your boots nonetheless.
Well, I have no time for conspiracy theories normally, because normally it's people suggesting things without any evidence. But I think this is coming from the other point of view. This is people who are objective, pointing out things that don't make sense.
Yes.
And just leaving it there, just saying Kensington Palace don't seem to be a trustworthy source. And that's exactly what the Associated Press representative said yesterday. You know, I'm not alleging anything about what's happening there. I'm just saying someone who is paid to be in public eye hasn't been in the public eye since December, and the reasons we are being told that is the case don't add up.
They don't seem to be true, do they? And the photograph, manipulating a photograph speaks of hiding stuff.
And manipulation, it's not just touching up, it's not airbrushing a wrinkle out. It's enough for media.
It's misdirection. It's deliberate and preconceived misdirection, and the clumsiness of it becomes part of the story as well. The way that they spotted it almost immediately. I've
been following it for 2 or 3 weeks, which makes me maybe sound more like one of the mad people, but it's because I'm someone who doesn't like the royal family, and maybe I look too much to see things I don't want to like about them.
Okay.
But whereas my girlfriend isn't a royalist, but loves the history of it, and it's something that we kind of can both look at and kind of come at it from different angles, but I think both from the objective points of view. And the thing is, this would be the clearest, easiest thing for them to clear up. I know if she has an illness or a hospitalisation, that you should respect privacy and not demand someone to tell them how you were doing. But they could diffuse this very, very easily. But everything they've done the last 2 or 3 weeks have made it worse.
Well, this is where it becomes a little, perhaps unexpectedly, fragile territory, because I thought it was a zinger of a take earlier this week when I pointed out that they have decided that this febrile circus of speculation is a preferable reality to the one in which they come forward and tell the truth. But what I missed, and what you remind us of, is the possibility that the truth might be something huge.
It could be trivial. It could be
trivial. In which case,
she's a very she does, her image is everything. She might be have a puffy face or something. It might be trivial unless she's stubborn or they are stubborn.
Yes.
It could be trivial, but that's the thing. It doesn't matter.
And wiser heads would not prevail. If it's a combination of triviality and vanity, it wouldn't matter what advisors say or what they say to each other. They may not agree with each other about the tactics that are being adopted. But it is. Apart from really, really serious illness that they are not yet ready to go public with, in which case you almost feel a bit soiled having a conversation about it at all until you remind yourself about the reason why the royal family exists, if you like. And I can't see what else fits the facts available. I really can't.
That's my last point. It's not about me alleging anything. It's not my business. But the truthfulness of the royal family. The royal family has a horrible, insidious relationship with the press, as you point out a lot.
Yes.
The difference between how this is covered and how Harry and Meghan is covered is really obvious and should point out that hypocrisy. But they depend on the press to survive, I think, because objectively, I think it's unfair. They apparently have, magic blood donated by God that makes them better than you and me. I disagree with that.
Well, I do as well. I do passionately as well. And these things, in a sense, remind us of that. What are you like? Forgive me, and I'm a little late for the news, so don't answer this at length. What are you like on other stories that could possibly be filed under conspiracy? I sense that it's not your natural territory, Chris.
No, I'm a carbon data analyst. I'm a science type person. I have no time for climate scan or any other type of spurious stuff.
But this one has caught your interest.
Evidence.
It's caught your interest because there's no evidence to possibly.
There's no evidence, and it keeps getting worse. And silence becomes the problem at some point.
Yeah.
Especially for a public family that apparently works for us. Yeah.
Do you know, I'm glad you were listening today because you're treating this story with the seriousness that I want to treat it with, while also recognising the ridiculousness of some of the context. And by that, all I mean, it really is the status and even arguably the existence of monarchy and magic oil or whatever it is you get anointed with. And, man gets new hat. And yeah, I quite like all the pageantry. I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, a fully paid up Republican. And Chris has taken us into the territory that I wanted to be into. Are you the sort of person who, as Chris says, on whether it comes from vaccines or the moon walk or the September the 11th attack or climate change, you are evidence-based, you are scientific, you are factual. But this story, and this is why filing it under conspiracy theory feels increasingly wrong, this story is reaching parts that other stories cannot reach because it flies in the face of everything we've ever known. The relationship, the symbiotic relationship between royal family and media demands you give us the pictures, we'll leave you alone. But they faked the pictures. They faked the pictures. There's a phrase that I never thought I'd hear in the context of a conversation about Kensington Palace. And if you think that's a phrase you thought you'd never hear, try this one on for size. Kensington Palace has been compared to North Korea by a news agency executive who said the Prince of Wales's household was no longer viewed as a trusted source. That's in the Daily Telegraph, not the Daily Star, the Daily Telegraph. It's 11:34. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:39 is the time. I like this from Andrew. Let me find the correct... I've lost it now. I should really get the hang of this business. Andrew says, I've been listening for 2 calls now, and I've got no idea what the question is. Could you ask James to clarify, please? Hey, I see these messages, Andrew. It's not like I've got a crack team of operatives who filter through everything and then only bring me the choicest morsels. I have to do it all myself. And you're right, it's a fair point. I don't know what the question is, really. Do you? We're talking about that photo and the escalating situation that Kensington Palace find themselves in, where no one knows what's going on, least of all me, and indeed, least of all, anybody appearing on your television or radio anytime soon claiming to be a royal expert. But I'll tell you why it's interesting. It's interesting because this is no longer a story that those of us who don't really care about royal stories can dismiss. So it's interesting because the space into which explanations move is a space that has been deliberately created by Kensington Palace, and their actions have led to them being compared to North Korea by the head of one of the world's biggest photo agencies. This is really, really strange. And whatever the explanation is, even if it turns out to be relatively trivial, the catastrophe of handling it is not. So, in a sense, Andrew, who asked that question, what on earth am I asking? In a sense, I'm doing a Marvin Gaye, and I'm asking what's going on, 03456060973. But what I am particularly interested in, the position of people who don't normally go in for this sort of thing, in which I'd include myself. As the week has developed, I think I probably started the week thinking, oh, this will all come out in the wash, right? But as the week has gone on, I've found myself increasingly wondering whether or not there is something quite significant happening here, something quite serious. And the failure stroke reluctance of Kensington Palace to tell us what it is simply adds to that sense. And a quick word on... Susan's been in touch. I won't read out your surname, Susan, because I'm going to put you in idiot's corner, and you may feel that's a little unfair. Susan's listened to the same radio show that you've listened to, and she says, could you please stop bad-mouthing Princess Kate? You are stirring up hatred, which I thought was against your principles, so please just stop it. It is inappropriate. I've got a horrible feeling, Susan, that what you objected to was me saying, could you imagine what would happen if Meghan Markle had done this? So if that has stirred up hatred or counts as bad-mouthing Princess Kate, you find yourself not only in Idiot's Corner, but also screaming at your reflection in the mirror and getting angry with me for holding it up. Because the only thing I think I've said today that could be construed of criticism of Kate Middleton is the question of how the British media and sections of the British public, possibly including you, Susan, would be behaving if Meghan Markle had been caught manipulating photographs of her own family. And you know what the answer to that is. That the screaming would be audible from space. The Daily Mail and the rest of them would be absolutely hysterical with fury and with rage. It would prove all of their vile, often racist ideas about her trustworthiness, her integrity, her honesty. But it's not her that's been busted faking photos. It's her sister-in-law, about whom I have not said a single bad word. But when you in your own head answer the question of how you would have behaved if it had been Meghan Markle, it's funny that you end up getting cross with the person asking the question rather than with yourself for harbouring such vile views. Just a cautious suggestion. Paul's in Putney. This is great. Guess who's up next after you, Paul in Putney?
No idea.
It's Pat in Purley. Pat's in Purley. Hello, Pat in Purley.
Hello, James.
Pat in Purley and Paul in Putney. Have you met before?
No.
Not knowingly.
Well, you have now. This is perfect. This is my. I want all calls one day to be like this. I go now. Well, enough from Paul in Putney. It's time for a Pat in Purley. Pat in Purley. I'm just going to put you back on hold and on pause. Thank you, Keith. Pat in Purley back on pause. Paul in Putney. Fill your boots. What would you like to say?
All right. Well, look. I mean, just to preface with,
yes.
I wouldn't normally get into these stories either, so it's kind of cut across to me for some reason. And I think what it is, thinking about it a little bit, is that under the Queen, I think there was we came to expect, or I kind of assumed that there was a certain level of competence,
yes.
Stability. Not that they were perfect, not that there wasn't a few missteps along the way, but essentially there was a kind of enduring qualities, if you like, of Britishness, put it that way.
Yes.
And it was a safe institution, one of the kind of cornerstones of this country. Like it or loathe it, but there it was.
I mean, it is, yes, you're right, it's the sort of cartoonish incompetence of it, in a sense.
Exactly, 100%. That is exactly, I mean, I'm just gobsmacked by the incompetence and the way a lot of key players seem to have run for cover. And who would assume that we're all quite media savvy now?
Yes, that's true.
And a photograph, even trying to put out that photograph to try and quell the fires that are raging around this story, I think was misguided. But then to have it doctored and then to undermine their whole credibility, so you throw another kind of gallon of fuel on a fire that's raging. I mean, I'm not a media expert, but I sure as hell wouldn't have done that. And I could have seen that you put this out with that kind of cack-handed editing and expect that to...
And of course, what they haven't done, and again, we're both missing something here. What they haven't done is put out the original version the next day and just say, here you go, nothing to see here, no panic over, calm down, lads, here's the original.
That's what I don't... I mean, isn't lesson one, get in front of the story? I mean, it just seems that there is a kind of a grossing... I don't know who's running this. I mean, the blaming of Kate, or her taking responsibility for that, etc., and then the photo being withdrawn, I just think all of that, was undermines the whole competence of the institution. And I would, to a certain extent, I suppose, I draw some parallels to the Liz Truss 40-odd days in government, where, like them or loathe them, the Tories had a certain competence for economic management, or at least that was their brand.
So a certain competence for news management would be a nice way of explaining why you are surprised by your interest in this story.
Yeah, I'm gobsmacked at how it's been mishandled. I certainly, like everyone, I wish Kate nothing but the best, and I hope she's fine. I absolutely...
I want to stress that, because do you know what? I don't know why this has popped into my mind while you were talking, but they're not just members of the royal family. They're parents as well. They're mums and dads as well, and it may be that they don't want to tell their children whatever it is that they're currently not telling us.
Absolutely, and I would differentiate between the individuals and the institution. And I think the institution is letting the individuals down despicably, incomprehensibly. I cannot understand how the institution is doing this to them. And I'm no great royalist, but look, whatever is going on with her, I'm sure it's a very tough time, and I think she's deserves some dignity, respect, and space. But at the same time, that puts more pressure.
No, I think you're a nice man, and that's sensitively put, and I suspect a fortnight from now, or possibly a week from now, we will all go, oh, crikey, that makes sense. Apart from perhaps the manipulated photograph, but depending upon how unpleasant the scenario is, and I'm thinking medically, then the stress levels required to do something as outwardly silly as that would suddenly make sense as well. But I don't know. And of course, that is the deal. That is what Harry has talked a lot about. That is the thing you can't escape, that symbiotic relationship between media and royal family. You can't turn it off, even when you might want to. And that means living with this febrile speculation is one of the prices you pay for that gilded life of epic privilege and inherited wealth. Is it fair? Probably not. Can you walk away from it? Not really. You can try, but you still, as Harry has discovered, remain of epic interest whether you want to be or not. And of course he wants to be. He wants to use his status to pursue his own goals and dreams. But I mean, that's why it is a story that is obviously not going anywhere. I'd put some money, though, on the less generous theories being wrong. Hey, that was Paul in Putney, so you know who's next, don't you? Up first after the break, it's only Pat in Purley.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:53. Do you know, almost as a joke, rather as a joke, I almost said, I wonder if anyone's blamed Meghan Markle for this yet. And before those words had come out of my mouth, Natasha Devon, my friend and colleague who will be with you this weekend, sent me a screenshot of something from the Mirror. Exclusive. Meghan Markle needs to speak loud in defence of Kate Middleton after family photo crisis. I mean, far be it from me to wonder when the last time anybody from the royal family spoke loud in defence of Meghan Markle was, but it is a mark perhaps of how crazy things are. And that question of why this story has assumed the momentum it has assumed actually feels a little more within reach to me now. I thought this would be the opposite. I thought that we'd be even more confused by 12 o'clock than we were at 11. I'll tell you something else as well, which I've been reminded of by Eleanor. The rather splendid podcast series that Ian Dunt and Dorian Linsky do together, Origin Story, looking at some misunderstood things, looking at conspiracy theories. It's a fantastic podcast. But they point out, so you probably don't think you believe in conspiracy theories, do you? So I certainly don't think I believe in conspiracy theories. But what do you think the dead cat is? What do you think the dead cat... Oh, well, they've only let this out now so that they'll distract us from the other. I'm sure I've bought into dead cat theories of politics, particularly when Boris Johnson was in Downing Street. They're almost certainly not true. They're almost certainly conspiracy theories. The whole dead cat meme is a conspiracy theory. Oh, yes, secretive people in control are deliberately trying to distract us from the thing they don't want us to talk about by giving us something else to talk about. So I don't think any of that is going on here. I think the answer, when it emerges, will be oddly universal. I really do. I think it will be something that will make most people go, oh, crikey, I think we would have probably behaved in exactly the same way had it been us. And I wonder whether some of the people engaging in the more febrile speculations will feel a little shame. I could be wrong. I mean, it might be the scandal to blow the roof off all scandals, but I just don't think so. Pat's in Purley. Pat, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I've become a little bit nervous while I've been waiting for you, so you'll have to go easy on me.
Of course I will, always. Always. I'm a pussycat. Pat in Purley and the pussycat presenter. There we go. It's all there, all the P's. Carry on.
No, I was going to say, I agree with what Paul was saying, in the sense that I think there's a certain level of incompetence that's coming through, but I think that incompetence is quite deliberate.
Okay.
In the sense, the reason why I say that, because obviously while the Queen was alive, there was a very tight ship. Since the Queen has passed, each of the houses are going more or less their separate ways from the point of view of communication.
Yes.
And I think with William, he's trying to establish himself, and therefore he's got his own strategy as to how he communicates. But I think at the same time, what he's trying to do, he's in a situation, and I think he wants out. But I think at the same time, it's a question of how does he get out?
Well, out of the royal family?
No, not out of his relationship.
Oh, do you?
His relationship,
Ooh,
yes, I do.
About that. Okay.
No. Well, I just said it's.
No, fair enough. I mean, this is the problem, isn't it, with
theory.
vacuums, is that anything can move into the space available.
Exactly, and I think that's what it is. And I think what he's doing, he's trying to find his own way of how does he actually make that information known. So therefore, he's sort of like, things are happening, like the photograph, that was absolutely silly. And you'd have thought that in order to put it right, all they had to do is either produce the original, which doesn't exist, or just, bring another picture out that is up to date with Kate. And if he's unable to do that, I think the question is he's sort of gauging to see how we're responding as the public as these things are occurring. And I think what he's seen is that people are starting to fall into camps, i.e. William's camp or Kate's camp.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that we're all at it now, aren't we? Because I disagree with you, but the one thing we can both agree on is that neither of us have got a Scooby-Doo what's going on, have we?
Exactly, we don't. But as you say, if there's a vacuum, then something happens to fill that vacuum, and that's what we're doing.
And yes, you're right. And the more I think about it, and to be honest with you, Pat, I hadn't thought about it much until we started talking about it on the radio. The more I think about it, the more I suspect that the truth won't be bells and whistles and fireworks and scandal. It will be something very sad and quite not banal, but normal and ordinary. So which means I don't think, so marriage breakdown would fall into that category, but I think it might be something more poignant than that. I shall squeeze in one more. Thank you, Pat in Purley. Unfortunately, Jess is in East Grinstead, neither of which begin with P. So you've blown it. You've blown it, Jess. You've broken my pattern. What would you like to say?
Hello, sorry about that,
That's
James.
Okay. On this occasion. You could have pretended you were Patricia in Perryvale, couldn't you? Just to keep the... Go on, what do you want to say?
You can call me whatever you like. I've got a sneaking suspicion you're going to want to put me in your idiot's corner anyway. But I wanted to say a couple of things on this. First of all, and I know you have already done a spot on the wars, but I'm listening to all of this and I'm thinking, how ridiculous. At the end of the day, when you think what's going on in the world at the moment, we've obviously got Ukraine, we've got Gaza, we've got Haiti. We're making a great big fuss over really what is really a bit of a non-story, which I feel has been whipped up slightly.
Well, I agree and disagree. And three things. There's a difference between interesting phone-in topics and important news stories. Secondly, of course, as you've alluded to, we did discuss the Middle East in the first hour. But thirdly, when the boss of one of the biggest photo agencies in the world comes out and says that Kensington Palace is now on the same footing as North Korea when it comes to trustworthiness, I think you have to at least take notice, Jess, even if you're not going to, stick a flag in it.
I do think as well there's a little bit going on with the media here, certain elements of the media. I actually feel that there are some things which I think, the royal family are funded by the taxpayer partly, and obviously they are public figures. But I also feel that when it comes to a medical thing, they've already perhaps given out more information than they really needed to by saying that she was having an operation, it was abdominal, it wasn't cancerous. I'm wondering how many of us would want our medical conditions and operations, everything plastered all over the media.
I think that's a valid point. None of us would. But equally, none of us get to live in palaces and drive around in golden carriages all day. So that's the trade-off. And I'm not defending it, but I'm just reminding you that's...
No, okay, yes, fair enough. But there's also a lot of people that have more gilded lives as well. And I don't think that means that, when you've had a major operation, pain is pain. And obviously she'll be having very good pain.
Then why put the photo out then?
I think
why not just say what you've just said?
I actually think the photo was just put out as a rather nice Mother's Day photo. She's edited
Sunday
it herself.
Sunday night, Mother's Day, no one's going to think.
Maybe she'd had a glass of wine before she edited it, who knows. But
I wasn't expecting the Spanish Inquisition, she said, the next morning when the whole world had kicked off about it.
Probably not.
No
I mean,
one expects this.
I've never
No,
done it.
you're nice. Everyone's been nice today, haven't they? Every caller has been nice. I think it's even if we don't necessarily agree, but I think you're probably closest to the truth. Personally, I know nothing. I want to stress that. Like anybody in the British media claiming to be a royal expert, I know nothing about anything when it comes to this. When it comes to this issue, when it comes to the facts of it. And that's why I doubt we'll return to the topic at any time soon, because eventually the full facts will emerge, and I would suspect, just as a journalist, an alleged journalist, I would suspect sooner rather than later. But I was going to make a joke about someone blaming Meghan Markle for it, but like night follows day, someone already had. In the next hour of the programme, we return to Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, which I've never said this about Keir Starmer before. I found it quite moving. And the importance of arts plural, the arts, in your life, not as a career, but as a gear that you have in your life, a gear you can move into that you wouldn't have without the arts. I want to try and pin that down after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes after 12 is the time. This is, I don't have, it depends on my mood. You've probably noticed if you've been kind enough to listen to the programme for more than 10 minutes. I don't really have favourite subjects. I have themes that I return to, but sometimes they land and sometimes they don't. It's quite an alchemy, this old business, isn't it? The time we spend together every day. You can tell, even if I put in 100 yards of training, you can tell if I'm not that interested in the subject that we're discussing. If like the news agenda is a little bit light and I can't find something, or I feel that, so you can tell. It's so bizarre. Not so much in quantity. We'll usually get the calls, but quality. I don't want to offend anyone who's been kind enough to ring into the programme, but if my heart's not really in a subject, we get a lower calibre of call from when my heart really is in a subject. And some subjects, you know that my heart is absolutely married to. I don't always know why. I don't always have the ability to explain why. But I just know it in my water. I just know that something is important, that it really matters, and that this weird little space that we've created together over the years is a good space in which to examine it. And Keir Starmer drove at full speed into the middle of that space yesterday. And I think that what I just said about authenticity holds true here as well. You can tell he's not, oddly, for a very successful lawyer, he's not a natural orator. He's not a great orator. He swallows words sometimes at PMQs. Hey, look, I imagine it's really nerve-wracking. If you're normal, PMQs would be nerve-wracking. If you're Boris Johnson, it probably wouldn't be. Because if you have no shame and no conscience, you can't be embarrassed or ashamed. So why would you be worried about a scenario in which it would be quite easy to be embarrassed or ashamed? But Keir Starmer is not a natural orator. I think he's an authentic politician, but one who sometimes struggles to convey his true self. But sometimes when he speaks, the sincerity and the authenticity is clear. And I think when he spoke yesterday about the arts, it's important to understand Keir Starmer's backstory if you want to understand his politics. And his dad's role in that backstory is huge. His dad's sense of disappointment, his dad's sense of, and I've spoken to Keir Starmer about this. I'm not speculating unduly or speaking out of turn, and I know that he regrets not having these conversations with his dad. I think the most poignant thing I've heard Keir Starmer say was about the scrapbooks. I didn't get that out of him when I interviewed him. I saw that somewhere else quite recently, and his dad never really said he was proud. Same sort of generation as my dad. Never said he was proud, but he would. He after he passed, they found scrapbooks in the attic. And he said something that I'll never forget. He said, I knew it was my dad because of the way they were put together. His dad was a toolmaker, as you probably know, a craftsman. So had great skills in that kind of area. So everything was so like a draftsman's work. And he said, I knew it was my dad because of that. And he'd kept the press cuttings from his legal cases and the beginnings of his political career, and couldn't articulate pride. A lot of people have fathers from that emotional background, that historical background. It's usually fathers, not mothers. And he couldn't convey it in person. Couldn't say, I love you, son, I'm so proud of you. But he could do it internally and collect the cuttings and things like that. So that's authenticity. And when he speaks about the arts, when he speaks about his first ever trip abroad being to Malta as a member of a youth orchestra, and I remember asking him about this, and he knew he wasn't good enough to make a career out of it. He was good, but to be a professional musician, even if you make it and you get a place in an orchestra, you need to be beyond good. You need to be among the best in the country, the best. And he knew he wasn't quite good enough, but he still loved playing the flute and he loved music. And and his background is crucial here. That the idea that the country has gone backwards. My granddad, my mother's father, who I never met, was essentially an autodidact. I mean, the culture that he imbued himself with. You'd go to night school. He just loved it. It was quite normal for working class people in the first half of this century to avail themselves of public facilities, libraries, but also night classes, schools, culture, orchestras, the Halle in Manchester, the idea that opera, or certainly that classical music was somehow the reserve of the elite, it's obnoxious if you look at history. And yet in Britain in 2024, there's three things that always really stick in my craw when they are described as middle class. One is books. Oh, that's so middle class. How did that happen? I mean, seriously, how did that happen? How did the idea that reading books is a socio-economic status-based pastime? It wasn't true in the 70s when I was a kid. You must always tell me if I'm suffering from in-my-dayitis, but I don't think I am. The idea that books are middle class, that's terrible. Food, the idea that good food, that when Jamie Oliver went on his mission against turkey twizzlers, he was somehow middle class and he was alienating working class mothers. How insulting is that? Absolutely incredible. And then the sort of mothership of those two observations is culture in general. Culture in general, the arts. If you go to a school like mine, you have no choice but to engage with the arts. You might not buy it, it might not work, but goodness me, the teachers and the theatre trips and the orchestra trips and the ability to play musical instruments and to be in plays and to go to art class. Good God, you'd have to get up early and work hard not to find something that engaged you, that got you into gear, that gave you something that nothing else can give you. That's what Keir Starmer was talking about yesterday. So I'm going to play you that little bit of that clip again. God, the last century. Thank you, Kieran. Yeah, so the first half of the last century, forgive me. I was talking about the access to culture that all classes in this country had. Here it is, and you look me in the eye and tell me that this isn't the most authentic you've ever heard him sound.
These encounters with art and culture change us forever, and they certainly changed me forever. And when I left my little village of Hurst Green and went to the city of Leeds to go to university, I discovered a whole new world of indie bands, Orange Juice, Wedding Present, back then with a guitar that was lent by my good friend John. And even now, listening to Beethoven or Brahms as I read the Sunday papers takes the edge off some of the more uncomfortable stories. And that's the power of your industry. It is not just a nice to have. It's essential for our economic growth as well as our personal growth, who we are.
So there it is, personal growth. So I'm always wary of telling you not to ring in, but I don't want to hear from you if your paycheck depends upon it. All right, we've done that before. It's brilliant, fascinating, quite moving. But that's not what we're talking about today. Keir Starmer did not become a politician as a consequence of playing the flute. If he'd become a professional flautist, that would be... So don't ring me if your paycheck depends upon it. I'm talking about your personal growth. And do you know, sometimes I get to the end of these introductions and I think, oh, no, that's a better question to ask. I'm going to ask both. I want to know who gave it to you. I want to know who gave it to you, because it may have been your parents. That would be the more expected and ordinary example. But it may also have been somebody who took you to a place that your family couldn't have taken you to because they didn't have the cultural vocabulary. And I don't mean a physical place necessarily. I mean who just introduced you to that thing that has proved so valuable to you for so long? Poetry, literature, art, music, whatever it is, theatre, opera, whatever it is. I want you to do two things. If I use the word Philistine and I pronounce it thus instead of Philistine, would you know what film I've seen in the last month? Is that just a tiny, tiny, tiny little example of cultural vocabulary? So I watched The Holdovers, which is a beautiful film, brilliant film. The actress who got Best Supporting Actress at the Oscars is one of the stars of it. I watched a beautiful film called The Holdovers. Seen 3 brilliant films lately. I know, I've told you what they are: The Perfect Days, The Holdovers, and American Fiction. And he's a classics teacher, and he says Philistine. So, because I'm quite magpie-like, I remember I must have subconsciously thought, is that how you pronounce it? I've always said Philistine. I don't think it matters. I'm sure you can pronounce it both ways. But I want you to imagine that a Philistine is listening to this. Somebody who, through either, well, I want to say through no fault of their own, because we're nice like that. So through no fault of their own, somebody who thinks that art and culture are a waste of time. One of those weird Americans who went to prison for financial fraud said something about thinking books are a waste of time. I've never read a book. I think books are a waste of time. So that's what I mean when I say Philistine. Somebody who is culturally bereft, culturally bankrupt, culturally lonely, and doesn't think it's a problem. I want you to explain to them what it means to you and why. Okay, 0345 6060 973. But I also want you to describe the gift and the giver. You look back now, March the 15th, 2024, you look back to 1994, 1984, 1970. Someone came into your life and gave you something, which decades later has grown into an appreciation for. What? What is it, and why does it matter so much? When Starmer uses the relatively anodyne phrase personal growth, I want you to make that phrase into a poem. And he says personal growth. What do you hear? What do you say? What do you know? The way that a poem can take you to places. I could go on for an hour about this. I'll start quoting poems in a minute. But I'd rather hear from you on 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:20 is the time. You talk about access to the arts. It's quite a dry phrase. You talk about personal growth. It's quite a dry description of what access to the arts achieves. I want to get rid of the dryness, if you pardon the expression. I want you to tell me what it means to you to have had access to the arts when you were young. And that way we understand why it is so important for our country and so important to Keir Starmer. Steve's in Caterham to kick things off. Steve, what would you like to say?
Afternoon, sir.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, I've been a trumpet player for, 49 years.
49.
I started when I was 5.
Oh, wow.
Came from a family, I've come from a family of all musicians, all professional musicians. I'm the only one that doesn't do it for a living. So I'm the black sheep of the family. Ironically, my dad, who was an ex-professional, played the Superman theme, the first Superman film.
How does that go? Remind me how that goes.
Oh God, you do this.
Well, of course I do this.
If you think of Superman, you can't think Star Wars.
No, well, that's what I'm thinking. I've got Star Wars coming out. That's Superman. It's not far off. Was it the same composer as Star Wars?
Yeah, Williams. Yeah,
I thought it might have been. He's done all right, hasn't he? Just chucks a couple of notes, swaps a couple of notes around, and gets another massive international smash hit cinema soundtrack. Amazing, John Williams.
The man.
Yes. So you didn't follow your dad into professional.
He reckoned I'm the most musical, but I've got a sister who's been a cellist for her entire life in a major orchestra. A brother that's played the last post at Twickenham for the rugby. But I'm the only one that doesn't get paid for it, and that's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. I absolutely love doing it. I play once a week in a wind band in Croydon, and that makes sure I keep playing.
What do you get? Tell the Philistine, tell the fictional Philistine listening to this what you get out of it.
Well, the personal pride and the personal. I'm going to get an opportunity in June to stand on the stage at Fairford Halls, which is a big concert hall in Croydon, with a 50, 60 piece band behind me and play a movement of a concerto in front with them accompanying me. You don't get that opportunity in amateur life very often.
And what happens inside you?
Oh, I'll be absolutely turning somersaults, but I will also love it.
Joy,
absolutely love it. I mean, I do a lot of last posts, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Because obviously, Remembrance Sunday is only needed to. You have to be a trumpet player to do anything but that. And that that's pride. I feel an honour to get a chance to do that sort of stuff. And even during lockdown, you remember the clap on Thursday evenings. We got after the first couple, we started me and the kids. We started actually doing little performances out on the pavement.
Oh wow!
For the road, and by the time we'd finished, by July, we organised. We had about an hour and a half concert where people came out, sat on the road. And
I bet that reached parts.
And everybody along, and we played for a good hour and a half.
Oh, that's magic! I love that. We never know, do we, who we'd be if we hadn't had that particular building block of our personality, or that particular chapter of our life story hadn't been written. We never know who we'd be. But can you speculate at all on who you would be, what you would be without music? The trumpetless Steve.
I think I'd probably feel less. I'd accomplish less in my life.
Less fulfilled.
Because I consider myself to be a half decent trumpet player, but in no way a professional. I'm a professional trumpet player. Should be able to play an entire concert, no matter what he's playing, and not even split a note. I don't mean play a wrong note, but not even split a note. My dad used to play 6.5-hour operas, and if he cracked one note, people would raise eyebrows. If he cracked one note 2 shows in a row, major eyebrows would be released. But for me, I haven't got the time to practice. I haven't got the ability to play that well.
What you get out of it is worth its weight. It's priceless, right? Priceless.
Absolutely. I wouldn't give it up. I mean, I've had problems with teeth and problems in the past that threatened to make me give up, and the thought of it just. Yeah,
that's it, isn't it? It's like a limb or a gear or a. That's it. It's what it's a perfect start, Steve. Thank you. That's it. When are you at the Fairfield Halls?
June.
June the what?
Oh, that's not fair.
All right. Well, someone will dig it out. It's a beautiful space. I played the Fairfield Halls many years ago. It's a fantastic space. It really is. And what's really nice when you do little tours, and Steve will know this, is that backstage, the posters and some of the decorations go back decades. The Fairfield Hall's probably more than anywhere else. Like a sort of who's who of 1970s, 1980s TV stars who moved from variety onto television, which for some reason is where my heart lies in terms of light entertainment, and they're all there. It's sort of Dustin G and Les Dennis and Russ Abbott and Bob Monkhouse, Morecambe and Wise. They've all played there, and the posters are still there backstage. Magic, that. 26 after 12. Bev's in Waddingham. Bev, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello,
Hiya. I grew up in Grimsby and from a working class background, and after I had children, I went to university at about 26. I got a degree, but my first job was where we gave out government grants to people to projects, local community projects, and there was a chap there who I think knew I was low in confidence, and he took me to see Barry Hines, who wrote Kes.
Kes, yes.
Yeah, and he was doing a talk at Sheffield University, and I can't emphasise enough the power that had on me, because I was a person that didn't do that. Working class people like me didn't go to that kind of thing. It just wasn't.
Even though he is, perceived certainly as a working class author, it wouldn't have been a literary event. Wouldn't have been something that you thought was on your ticket.
Absolutely not. But of course, I'd seen Kes and found Kes very powerful. But actually, hearing him talk about his new book and it kind of just opened doors to me, or it told me that I could enjoy these kind of things. I would get something from going to the theatre, And since then, I get so much from the theatre. I mean, I love reading, I love film, but for me, theatre is just so powerful, and I come away from things feeling like it's had such an impact on me.
That's magic, isn't it? And that's, again, none of us can answer this question. I asked Steve and I'll ask you, what would Bev be? Who would Bev be now without that moment in her life, without that little seed being sown that day that you've been watering ever since?
I just wouldn't have been to the theatre like I have, and I wouldn't have seen the amazing plays that I see, and that wouldn't have broadened my experience and my perspective, because I think you get so much understanding from going to those kind of things. So the kind of me would have been probably very self-conscious still. I mean, I'm not saying that, there's not a little bit of that there, but the power of what that person Nick did for me, I've always, and I say I'm talking 20 years ago, if not more, but it just changed me so much, and I just so enjoyed it, and I just think, yes, you should and you can go to these, and it will make a difference to your understanding of other people.
We should have had you lot. We should have had you and Steve and everyone else queuing up yesterday to do the case studies after Starmer had finished speaking, because access to the arts sounds a bit like a sort of slip road on a bypass, a town bypass, doesn't it? Access to the arts, A33, but you're describing it in perfect terms, Bev. Beautiful terms.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, and I go over. I don't know if you've heard of John Godber does plays.
Of course, I have. Hull Truck Theatre Company.
Absolutely, and they're amazing. I just love, and I've taken my grandchildren, and and I know that they think it's great. So
passing
you
it on,
see the ripple effect.
Passing it on, and then they'll pass it on, and then everybody's life is improved, everybody's life is enriched, and of course by developing what you describe as understanding other people's perspectives or empathy or whatever you prefer to call it, the world becomes a slightly better place as well every time it happens. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. Some incredible messages, some really, really emotional messages coming in on this question of the rather anodyne-sounding notion of access to the arts being anything but anodyne once it is applied to our real lives, our lived experiences. I shall share some of them with you and get back to the phone shortly. But first, we said we needed to remind ourselves to try harder on keeping up to date with developments in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And to that end, Phillips O'Brien joins us once again, the Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews. Two developments that you can help us with today, Phillips. The first, something that many of us probably didn't even know existed. It's pro-Ukraine or pro-Kyiv Russians operating in Russian territory on Ukraine's behalf, and they've had a pretty good 24 hours.
I mean, it started at least 24 hours ago. There does seem to have been, I think we need to be careful of our language. I wouldn't say this is a full-throated invasion, but I think we could call this an incursion. A raid into Russian territory by a Ukrainian-sponsored group of Russians. It's partly to reveal the fact that actually Putin's thrown everything into Ukraine. There's hardly any troops left in Russia. And so even the border directly across from Ukraine is very poorly defended. The Russians have just sort of stripped everything out to send it into Ukraine. And this is, on the one hand, I think, to try and embarrass Putin before the election, but also to try and force the Russians to take troops out of Ukraine. So, it's I don't think they're going to reach Moscow. I'd be amazed if they did. Yeah. But, they seem to be, they're going to push forward until they meet opposition. And it just shows how little opposition is there.
And I think that it's the Russian Volunteer Corps, isn't it? Led by Denis Nikitin. They are more enemies of Putin than they are friends of Ukraine, I think.
My enemy's enemy is my friend.
Yes, exactly.
In that way, I mean, these are probably not the most palatable people in the world, but they are Russian forces willing to go into Russia for Ukraine, and so the Ukrainians are going to say thank you very much because they don't want to launch a Ukrainian invasion of Russia. So it's taking advantage of what they can do.
And in the other direction, a missile attack, I think, on Odessa, which we believe has killed 14 people. Why does that one stand out? Why is
It's just basically Odessa is in Russian minds in many ways the softest target, but it's also the most perverse. I mean, Odessa in Russian minds is a great Russian city. You know, this is what they've been claiming as a great bastion of Russian culture, and yet they're hammering it intensely. It's on the sea, so the Ukrainians can't, the interception options are not quite as advanced as if it were inland and they could track the missiles farther. The Russians could fire at it from greater safety. So it's in some ways a softer target for the Russians to attack, and it's pure terror bombing. I mean, this is terror bombing, and it might have been a double tap attack where you send one missile out, then wait for the services to come help those people, and then attack the same place again, and so you can kill the support services, the rescuers, and all of that. So it's a terror kind of bombing to make Odessa pay for not doing what the Russian government wants Odessa to do.
So a punishment beating of sorts.
Yeah, that's not a bad way of putting it, James.
Finally, we've talked a lot about the direction of the move towards attrition, the early days of surprises and gains and failures long behind us now. What might we be looking for next in terms of significant events?
Well, on the land, I mean, there's this real problem that until the U.S. decides what it's going to do, Ukraine is going to be relatively low on ammunition. It does look like the Czech effort to secure shells from around the world will result in something. So hopefully not the catastrophic issue that the Ukrainians were facing. But right now, if they do not get any U.S. aid or material U.S. aid going forward, Ukraine will have to rely on its partners to provide something to keep it going. And that means for the next few months, we certainly aren't going to see many Ukrainian attacks. The hope is that for Ukraine, the Russians continue their offensives and the Ukrainians can use this to try and create higher losses than they suffer.
Okay. Phillips O'Brien, many thanks. Always, I don't want to say a pleasure, because obviously the stuff that we discuss with you is pretty grim, but it's always a privilege to benefit from your knowledge and learning. Phillips O'Brien, the Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews. Before we get back to the phones, just a couple of these. Really powerful stuff. I'm quite emotional writing this, says Julia. At 7 years old, my daughter went through a dreadful depression. Her self-esteem was at an all-time low, and she stopped doing all her favourite activities, brownies, piano, ballet. She had very few friends, and she cried all day, every day. Eventually, she joined the school choir, and the wonderful teacher gave her one line to sing at the summer fair choir performance. My daughter's life turned a corner in that moment. Someone believed in her and gave her the chance to feel special. I am indebted to this lovely teacher who saved my daughter and inspired me to start my own dance business, where I try to give all children the chance to sparkle and grow in self-esteem. Hallelujah to Keir Starmer for recognising this. My daughter can't sing, by the way, but she can dance and now runs a franchise of the business. That's absolutely lovely. Andy's in Morden. Andy, what made you pick up the phone?
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, James.
Hello,
52 years ago, I joined my secondary school, and they had a choir there. And unbeknownst to me, it was an absolutely spectacularly good choir for a bog-standard comprehensive school in South London.
Down to one teacher, probably. The passion of one teacher, I imagine, was it?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. The fellow that ran the choir was a musical genius. He could get kids singing from age of 11 to immense heights. I mean, we sang in places like Westminster Abbey, and we had major composers of the day writing for us.
Wow.
Now, scroll, yeah, so John Rutter and Benjamin Britten wrote for us.
Shut up, seriously?
Seriously, it's all a matter of public note.
I believe
you can look it up. Look up Once a School and you see it. So scroll forward 52 years. On Monday night, I was singing at the Royal Albert Hall. Now, I'm not a professional singer. I'm purely an amateur. And I was part of a concert there that was put on by Merton Music Foundation. And the genius that was behind that was a lady called Sue Bishop. She's a force of nature, an absolute force of nature. And as part of that concert, there were around 1,200 primary school kids there, all singing. There were 3 or 4 bands and a couple of orchestras. There was a special school there. It was a cross-generational concert. And those children that were there, they will never forget that evening. It was absolutely fantastic. And that's what Keir Starmer is getting at.
It is, isn't it?
Absolutely grassroots, proper grassroots music. And if any of those kids go forward from that and start playing an instrument or carry on singing, it will only do a lot of good for them.
Or just appreciating it as a listener more than you would have done if you'd never had the introduction to it as a participant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a religious person at all, but I have a real love of that sort of muscular Victorian Edwardian church anthem.
Yeah.
You know, I love singing that. I'll treat myself to. There's lots of things called come and sings that get advertised on the internet, and if it's a piece that I know, I will often treat myself to go along and just sing it in a scratch choir. But Monday night was very, very special.
What, just briefly, if you can, who would you be without it? What has it changed for you over the years?
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't, but you do. You don't, but you do. You don't know, but you do know.
Honestly, don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, because I work in predominantly, I work in the building trade, and you know, you meet all sorts of characters in there, and you're not expected to have a lot of culture. I mean, I use it as a marketing device now as well. You know, just to show people that I'm not dead from the neck upwards. And it is, you know, it's just a fantastic thing to do, James.
It just is, and it takes you to places that nothing else, where nowhere else can take you. 12:43 is the time. Andy, take care. Albert Hall, eh? I mean, the magic of that moment of walking onto those, because the stage at the Albert Hall is crazy, absolutely crazy. Did you know that? I hope this is true. I was told it by a trustee of the Albert Hall, so I hope it's true. That Victoria spent all the money on the statue of Prince Albert that's outside the Albert Hall, so they had to go to public subscription to get the Albert Hall built. And it meant that you could buy a box in perpetuity. So back in the day, obviously in the Victorian era, you could decorate it yourself. Because you owned the box, so you could. So they all looked different. They all had different. That must have looked crazy. Ed's in Norwich. Ed, what would you like? Oh, I'll come to you first after the break. Actually, it's just gone 12:44. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Steve, I'm going to put you in Idiot's Corner, but I've got a horrible feeling that you want to be there. Here goes boring. Music and arts might be worthwhile in private schools where our leaders go, but they have no place in state schools. They should be concentrating on technical subjects for their jobs, not this whole nonsense. I don't know if you're being serious or if you are truly that tragic, but either way, mate, I feel so sorry for you.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC. 12:49
is the time. I'm going to read you this because for two reasons, actually. One, a bit silly, but one, anything but. It's very, very moving. And I've had loads of messages like this. I'm sorry I can't read them all out. Hi, James. It's Oshin here. When I was really young, I was one of the only South Asian kids in my area. And at school, I always felt very self-conscious about that, especially since I'd never really connected with my siblings. When I was about 7 or 8, a guy called Hamza started making random videos on YouTube. I loved watching them because they were funny, but it also helped me break out of my shell and inspired me to learn video filming and editing, which I've always enjoyed. And I'm now in my last year of a TV and production course. It's not obviously the arts, is it? But it is. It's the power of media. And speaking of the power of media, Diane grew up in quite tricky circumstances. She describes her dad as being abusive and her parents were always arguing. And then, lying in bed scared one night, I switched on my radio and it was the most beautiful classical music. It calmed me down and spawned my lifelong love of opera and indeed beautiful music. So it's all there. It's another Hamza that I'm going to turn your attention to next. The First Minister of Scotland, Hamza Yousaf, who is my guest on this week's Full Disclosure. And I really hope you listen to this. I appreciate that if you're not Scottish or invested in Scottish politics, the temptation might be rather less than it would be with a Westminster politician, but it shouldn't be. You know, the future of the United Kingdom is very much in play, and the SNP, of which he is, of course, the leader, as well as being First Minister of Scotland, are absolutely crucial players in that process. And also, he's really interesting. And I think probably achieved a new level of prominence when it emerged a few months ago that his in-laws were stuck in Gaza and struggling to get out during the Israeli offensive, and that inevitably constitutes part of our conversation, which you'll hear now. But the full hour, in fact, you can tell. I mean, no, you can't tell, because sometimes I'm feeling more professional than I am at other times. But we went over by quite a bit on this. So I think 5 to 10 minutes over the hour. And normally I'm quite good at keeping a close eye and just tailoring it. But I kept thinking of, I just want to ask him about that as well. It's a really interesting conversation that I hope you enjoy as much as I did. But here's a little taster of full disclosure with the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf. Your in-laws, Nadia's parents, Majid and Elizabeth, when they got trapped in Gaza, there was no question of trying to keep it quiet. It wasn't one of those situations that you could have kept a lid on, or did you have conversations about whether or not you would go public?
We didn't say anything for the first couple of days.
No.
It's such a difficult issue to speak about publicly, in the sense that, my in-laws, we know Gaza was under control of Hamas. So if we, and of course there was no question of me criticising Hamas for and condemning their abhorrent terror attack on October 7th, but I also knew that could have an impact on them and their family. They could be targets. We know Hamas don't take kindly to people speaking against them. And if they could get to my in-laws, or get to my brother-in-law, for example, or any of the wider family, they could really be made an example of. So there was that consideration. And then there was a consideration as well about actually, if you criticise the actions of the Israeli government, which again, to me, there was no question of doing, given the amount of civilian bodies that were piling up, continued to do to this day, then actually maybe we'll never get them out, because getting them out would require, I suspect, some cooperation with the Israeli government through the official channels. So there was always that consideration. But to be honest, after a couple of days, it was very, very clear that they were trapped and they were stuck, and we had to raise their voice. And actually, it was my mother-in-law who said, "You need to tell the world what's happening." Like she was describing the devastation and destruction in the first few days, and said the world has to know what's happening, Humza.
The world still doesn't, in some ways, or this corner of the world.
I'm not sure actually that's true. I think the world does know, because you and I have seen the news reports on 24-hour news. We see the social media. And in fact, to me, that makes the horror even worse. So we're watching, and we've seen video footage of unarmed men with waving white flags being shot. We've seen children so malnourished that they're practically skeletons and then die. We've seen the footage of hospitals being hit, refugee camps being hit, UN schools being hit.
Well, we have, but I do wonder sometimes, particularly, I mean, I was looking at the Telegraph today, and they report some Conservative MPs criticising David Cameron for not being unstinting in his support of the Israeli government.
No. And that's, to me, that entrenched position is the problem. That actually, what we should be looking at is the undeniable mounting death toll of civilians, women and children, undeniable, given the footage that we've seen of how many thousands have been killed. You can argue about whether it's this many thousand or that many thousand, but it's thousands that have been killed.
It is 12:54, and that episode of Full Disclosure is available now wherever you get your podcasts. Back to the access to the arts, and I think our wholly successful attempt to render those words a little less anodyne, a little less dry. Quite a lot of moist eyes in their house today, judging by my inbox. Ed's in Norwich. Ed, what made you pick up the phone?
This created quite a lot of emotion, really. And going back to what your contributor said, Steve, I think he said something about that comprehensive shouldn't be doing anything of this nature. Well, I went to a comprehensive, and I really struggled at school to begin with.
Yeah.
And my two best friends decided that they were going to do free violin lessons.
Okay.
And I thought that if my mother found out that my two best friends are doing violin lessons, she's going to kill me.
Because you're not doing them. If you're not doing them, she's going to kill you.
Because I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And it's a small place where I grew up. So I went, and my mates quit, and then I stuck at it. But it was actually the only thing I actually felt like I was good at.
Really?
It gave me absolutely. I mean, I really struggle, as I said, in lessons, particularly things like maths and the sciences and stuff like that. But then so I did it for about a year and a half, I think, and I did my grade 1. But it gave me a boost of confidence. That's the thing. And I learned how to read music, and then I started getting into coming up to GCSEs, and I thought, you know what I'll do for my GCSEs is I'll build a guitar.
God.
So I built an electric guitar. And then I thought, well, I'll do this for a living. I'll start building guitars, and I'll go to somewhere like to do a musical instrument technology course. But by that point, I built a guitar, and it then led me into a route of engineering, and so that became the foundation of me, really, because it wasn't for those free lessons, then to get into music, then I wouldn't be where I am now.
Do you know, I'm 52 years old, and something I heard a lot in my childhood that never made sense to me just made sense listening to you.
What's that?
It's madness, mate. So I went to quite an expensive public school, which my parents couldn't afford, but that's a different story. And it was often said that the difference between this school and other schools, comprehensive schools, is they will find something. Every boy will find something that he's good at. And, and they would sometimes add, perhaps a little snobbishly, even if it's playing the drums or golf. So every boy will find something that they're good at. But listening to you, I was good at quite a lot of stuff, so I always thought that was a bit stupid. I didn't really understand what that meant. And now I do. I just get it. That's exactly what you've just described. They find something that you're good at, and your whole life changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this I feel like this sort of current cohort of government is that they kind of want you to shoehorn people into the academic kind of the physics, the chemistries, and all of that.
If they can't put a money on it, if they can't put a monetary value on it, as in employability, then they don't think it's worth anything.
But they're overlooking the fact that actually I came through into engineering and become an engineer as a result of that through an avenue of art, and it was free. And the other thing is that I didn't come from I came from a sort of a comfortable background. Sure. My parents were professionals, but I could have that exposure into that was just the ignition that I needed. But I never even had any anticipation that would have been the thing it was, and I probably didn't even know that at the time.
I love that word, ignition. I think that's the perfect word to use. It ignited something that you didn't even know was there.
Indeed.
And it's still there now.
Absolutely.
Still burning.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I play, and I'm not much of a violinist anymore, but I moved it into, because you couldn't play Metallica on a violin, so... so that, you can actually now, but it's a bit more fashionable, but back then you couldn't. So, yeah.
Guitar, all day long.
Playing the guitar is all day long.
You take care of yourself, mate. That's a perfect conclusion to this conversation. Apologies to Johnny and to Max and to Mike and to Shane and Erin and others. That's an absolutely extraordinary conversation. I enjoyed that so much. Thank you. That is it from me for another week. We'll be doing it all again on Monday morning from 10. If you did miss any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. So download it for free from your app store or just go to globalplayer.com, where you will also, of course, find full disclosure. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Lewis Goodall standing in for Tom Swarbrick for the final time this week. But now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.